Welcome to today's video about the escalating stages of radiation exposure. Level 0. This is the baseline, the quiet hum of the universe. It's the lowest level of radiation possible in our world, a constant presence you can't escape. Standing in a remote forest, miles from any city or technology, you are still immersed in it. The soil and rock beneath you emit it. The sun and distant supernovas shower you with it. Even the carbon and potassium inside your own cells make you infinitesimally radioactive. We call this background radiation. It's the air you breathe and the ground you walk on. The dose is minuscule, around 0.1 to 0.2 microsieverts every hour. The term sounds ominous, but the reality is utterly benign. You need specialized equipment just to detect it. There are no effects, no sensations, no danger. It is simply a fundamental condition of life on this planet, a silent static that goes completely unnoticed. Level 1. Here, the intensity rises, but only slightly.
We are still firmly in the realm of safety, now encountering common, low-level sources of man-made and concentrated natural radiation. When you eat a Brazil nut, you're at level 1. When you live in a home with granite countertops or walk through a modern concrete structure, you're also at level 1. This is the radiation integrated into our daily lives, posing no threat whatsoever. The primary source is often potassium-40, a naturally radioactive element present in many foods. Your body processes it just as it does any other mineral. A daily intake from food and water might add up to 1 or 2 microsieverts. You could consume 100 bananas in a day and face no radiological risk. Instruments can measure it, but your biology is indifferent. No harm, no symptoms, just the ordinary physics of the world. Level 2. At this stage, radiation is still safe, but it becomes significant enough to be formally tracked. You will not feel a thing, but you are now in an environment with measurably higher radiation. Perhaps you are flying at 35,000 feet, where there's less atmosphere to shield you from cosmic rays, or you are standing near certain industrial materials like phosphate fertilizers. These situations are not hazardous, but they are monitored. A single transcontinental flight might expose you to 20 or 30 microsieverts. This is still a fraction of a single chest X-ray. Health physicists classify this as very low-level exposure, but for anyone working in these conditions long-term, it's recorded. Airlines and research institutions log these exposures as a matter of protocol. You could spend years in this environment and suffer no adverse effects. But this is the point where science begins to take notes. Not out of concern for your immediate safety, but out of diligence. Level 2 is where the numbers start to be written down. Level 3. The radiation here is now significant enough to require procedures and planning, not for your body, but for occupational safety. Exposure at this level is most commonly encountered in medical imaging. A full-body CT scan, for instance, can deliver a dose of several millisieverts, which is several thousand microsieverts. A single scan is not considered dangerous, but regular exposure would be unwise. Level 3 represents the point where cumulative dose becomes a factor. One exposure is fine. A dozen exposures over a lifetime is also likely fine, but repeated, frequent exposures are where the risk profile changes. Your body has remarkable repair mechanisms, but they are not infinite. This is the level where radiation workers are required to wear dosimeters to track their exposure. Not because an individual day is risky, but because no one should have to guess their lifetime total. You could be in this field for hours and feel nothing, but the dose is being recorded because the long-term consequences are no longer theoretical. The boundary between safe and potentially harmful becomes much clearer. Here, the radiation intensity is enough to induce tangible biological changes if the exposure is sustained. We are now in the range of tens of millisieverts. This is not a lethal dose, nor is it immediately harmful, but to work in this environment for an extended period without shielding would be a serious gamble. This is the radiation field one might find in a nuclear fuel fabrication plant, or near equipment used for industrial radiography. A single controlled dose at this level, like for certain cancer treatments, is managed carefully by doctors, but spend days here unprotected and your cells will begin to show the strain. You won't feel sick, you won't get a rash, but your body's internal systems will be working overtime. Your lymphocyte count in a blood test might temporarily decrease. Your DNA may sustain damage that requires repair. This is not speculation. It is cellular biology. Regulatory agencies establish strict annual dose limits for a reason. Not because a brief passage is fatal, but because radiation, much like intense UV light, causes cumulative damage. At level 4, you are in a professional zone, managed by experts and protocols. Level 5. This is the point where radiation becomes an active physical threat. A short exposure is likely not fatal, but it will make you sick. We're talking about a dose of 100 to 500 millisieverts delivered over a short period. This is sufficient to cause the initial signs of acute radiation effects. You would likely experience persistent fatigue, waves of nausea, and a debilitating headache. These are not just feelings, they are clinical symptoms. Anyone in a nuclear facility exposed to this dose is immediately removed from duty and placed under medical observation. This is the reality faced by some emergency workers in the less contaminated zones of the Fukushima incident. Within this dose range, your lifetime risk of cancer measurably increases. If you were to remain in such an environment, the symptoms would escalate to include hair loss, a compromised immune system, and possible temporary sterility. At this level, radiation is no longer a number on a device. It is a force you can feel in your body. This is why containment buildings have thick concrete walls, and why exposure times are calculated down to the second. At level 5, radiation is an immediate and tangible hazard. Level 6. At this level, radiation makes its presence known immediately and aggressively. There is no question that something is wrong. Your body tells you in no uncertain terms. This is the onset of moderate acute radiation sickness, or ARS. The dose is in the range of 500 to 1,000 millisieverts, or 1 full sievert. If this dose is absorbed in a short burst, the symptoms manifest within hours. Intense nausea, vomiting, and fatigue. It might mimic a severe case of the stomach flu, but the cause is not a pathogen. It is systemic cellular damage, starting with the most vulnerable tissues: your bone marrow, the lining of your digestive tract, and your immune cells. These are the parts of you that regenerate the fastest, and radiation targets them first. Stay here longer, and your white blood cell count plummets, leaving you open to infection. Your ability to heal is impaired. Hair will begin to fall out. You will likely survive, but the experience will be grueling. This is the dose range that some of the liquidators at Chernobyl received in the days following the accident. They were not at the reactor's edge, but close enough to get sick, and for their health to be permanently affected.
At level 6, the clog on your recovery begins, and the damage is personal.
Level 7. This is where the body's ability to cope begins to fail. We're in the range of 1 to 2 sieverts. You do not recover from this without intensive medical intervention. At this level of exposure, about half of the victims will die within 30 days if left untreated. ARS becomes severe and systemic. Vomiting begins within an hour, followed by severe diarrhea and a high fever as infections take hold. Your bone marrow production effectively ceases. Your immune system is gone. You may begin to bleed spontaneously from your gums or under your skin as your platelet count crashes. These are not just symptoms. They are signs of catastrophic internal collapse. At 2 sieverts, survival, even with medical care, is not guaranteed. Treatment involves hospitalization in a sterile environment, powerful antibiotics, and blood transfusions, all in a desperate attempt to keep you alive long enough for your body to begin repairs. Many do not make it. The firefighters who worked on the roof of the Chernobyl reactor in 1986 received doses in this range. They were heroes, but most died agonizing deaths within weeks. Level 7 is not an abstract concept. It is a well-documented human tragedy. Level 8. This is a level from which there is almost no return. A radiation dose between 3 and 6 sieverts is overwhelmingly lethal. At 3 sieverts, survival is technically possible but requires extreme measures, like a bone marrow transplant. At 4 sieverts, even with the best medical care on Earth, 50% of those exposed will die. Above 5 sieverts, survival is considered impossible. This dose doesn't just damage the body's systems, it destroys them. Bone marrow is completely ablated. The lining of the intestines is stripped away, making it impossible to absorb nutrients and leading to massive fluid loss. The cardiovascular system comes under immense strain, and crucially, the central nervous system begins to fail. Victims become disoriented, confused, and may suffer seizures before lapsing into a coma. This was the fate of some technicians and scientists in the worst nuclear accidents of the 20th century. Their dosimeters often went off scale, unable to measure the full, horrifying dose. Severe burns appear on the skin, not from thermal heat, but from the raw energy being deposited within the tissue itself. At level 8, the medical focus shifts from cure to comfort, managing pain until the inevitable end. This is absolute devastation. A dose exceeding 10 sieverts will kill in a matter of days, if not hours. At this intensity, the primary target is the central nervous system. Within minutes, violent nausea and disorientation. Within the hour, uncontrollable tremors, seizures, and a descent into a coma. Death follows within 48 hours. The cause is no longer infection or bleeding. It is complete neurological and cerebrovascular collapse. The brain's electrical signals become chaotic. Organ function ceases. This is what the plant workers who looked directly into the exposed Chernobyl reactor core experienced. One operator was exposed to an estimated 20 sieverts. He died in a matter of hours, his body having absorbed an unsurvivable blast of gamma and neutron radiation. There is no treatment. There is no time for the body to even try to fight. The skin might look normal for a short time, but the person is already gone. Medical reports from such cases describe tissues that have lost all integrity. This is not death from a sickness. It is death from being torn apart at the atomic level. Level 9 is why radiation inspires such primal fear. Level 10. This is a theoretical threshold of instant obliteration. An exposure above 20 sieverts, perhaps far higher. This is the kind of dose you would receive by being physically inside the core of an operating nuclear reactor, or at the epicenter of a nuclear detonation, at the moment of fission. The exposure would last for less than a second. The effect would be instantaneous. At this level of energy, your DNA is not just damaged, it is shredded. Critical proteins are denatured. The nervous system instantly ceases to function. The body doesn't just die. It stops being a cohesive biological entity. If a person could somehow remain conscious for a few seconds, it would be a purely academic curiosity, as the mechanisms of life would have already been extinguished. No human has ever survived this. It is the absolute limit of biological tolerance.
In scientific terms, this level of radiation is only discussed in the context of remote robotics and computer simulations. No person could ever approach such a source.
Level 10 does not belong to the world of medicine or even accidents. It belongs to the physics of stars and the heart of atomic weapons. It represents a final, absolute endpoint, death so rapid and complete it precedes the very concept of suffering. If you found this exploration fascinating, be sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the world around us.